Days after the deadly riots at the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C. has transformed into a completely different city with thousands of National Guard troops deploying here ahead of the upcoming inauguration. The military buildup aims to avoid a repeat of last week's mob protests, and troops will be positioned to combat ongoing threats of violence. RT's Rachel Blevins is joining us now from the streets of D.C. with more on this. So, Rachel, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, well, Manila, we're out here in downtown Washington, D.C., where the city is currently under one of its strictest lockdowns yet. All around me, streets are closed off, businesses are boarding up, and it's important to note that this is usually an area where we would see a lot of tourists looking at different landmarks in the city, but instead they have been replaced by a very heavy police presence and an even larger National Guard presence. In fact, the National Guard has confirmed that it plans to deploy around 20,000 troops here to Washington, D.C. by Inauguration Day. That means that the United States will have twice as many troops deployed to its capital city as it currently has stationed in both Iraq and Afghanistan combined. It's also important to note here that these troops are not just here for a show of force. They are heavily armed and have been authorized to use lethal force against the public. That announcement came from the Army Secretary, and she said that it was specifically requested by federal authorities. Now, despite all of the precautions that are being taken here across the city, the director of the FBI still says that he is incredibly concerned about what attacks may be attempted to happen here in Washington, D.C., and he says those concerns are based on what he has seen online on social media. Take a listen to what he had to say about it earlier.
We are seeing an extensive amount of concerning online chatter, I think is the best way I would describe it, about a number of events surrounding the inauguration. And together with our partners, we evaluate those threats and what kind of resources to deploy against them. Right now, we're tracking calls for potential armed protests and activity leading up to the inauguration.
There are also a lot of concerns about whether the U.S. military is doing enough to root out extremism and activism within its own organization. We saw a statement recently from the Pentagon in which it said that it is now launching an investigation into just that, saying the goal is to determine the extent to which the Department of Defense and the military services have implemented policy and procedures that prohibit active advocacy and active participation related to supremacist, extremist, or criminal gang doctrine, ideology, or causes by active duty military personnel. Now, there are still endless questions surrounding exactly what happened at the U.S. Capitol last week, and prosecutors are now claiming that the actual goal of the rioters was to capture and assassinate elected officials in the U.S. government. Now, as for that infamous QAnon shaman, or the guy with the horns who led the charge into the U.S. Capitol, his lawyers are now saying that he is calling on President Trump to pardon him by claiming that he broke in because he was following the call of the U.S. president. Now, Trump has yet to respond to that call specifically, but he has said that he will consent to a peaceful transition of power, as here in the nation's capital, thousands of troops continue to deploy to make sure that that transition will happen by force. Reporting in Washington, Rachel Blevins, RT.